Tonight on the agenda, first, it's two-part. One is a presentation on the options, the systems that are subject matter to the consent decree that was entered in the case brought against the city over 2 years ago. That case was settled by consent decree entered by the court in June. And since that time, the city has put together a presentation which was given last week at the Senior Center, as well as tonight a presentation on each of the 4 options, and the law department can present that and answer any questions. Thereafter, there's also a related matter on the agenda, and that is for the council, pursuant to the terms of the consent decree, to elect 2 of the 4 systems, the system options that are listed forth in the consent decree. So if there's no objection, I would turn this over to the law department for them to present. And again, is an explanation. There's no opinion or weighing in favor or against by the presentation, but simply an explanation of what each option entails.
So tonight we will have a slideshow that will walk the council and the public through the 4 systems that would be deliberated on tonight by the council. After the presentation, slideshow presentation, there'll be time for any questions, and it's also my understanding that there are speakers that have registered on this, and we will hear from them as well. Following that, we will just go over the method of voting for tonight.
Good evening. My name is Rachel Brown. I'm the First Assistant City Solicitor with the Law Department, and I'm just going to be running through the slideshow. We're going to keep it pretty brief. The important thing here is there's an important vote tonight, and so we want to make sure it's absolutely clear what the options are and what they entail. So the 4 systems available are 1, district-based representation, 2, hybrid representation, a mixture of districts and at-large, and within that system, there are 3 sub-options, which we'll go over. 3rd, at-large system, which is ranked choice voting. And then finally, a 3-district representation system with ranked choice voting. So for each choice, I'm going to briefly recap what it is, outline some commonly noted features of each system. So an advantage, that somebody may see something as an advantage of one system, that very same feature may be perceived as a disadvantage to another person, depending on your perspective. I'm just going to say a few words about each system. And again, the city and the law department want to make it clear that we are not endorsing any of these options or arguments for them. The second is hybrid. And under a hybrid system, some candidates would be elected at large, so as presently, and some would be elected by district. And under the hybrid system, there are 3 subcategories. So there's a hybrid 8-1 system, where there would be 8 district seats and 1 at-large seat. City Council remains at 9 members. Option 2, an 8-3 system with 8 district seats and 3 at-large seats. The council would be expanded to 11, 8 plus 3. And finally, a 7-2 system with 7 district seats and 2 at-large systems. And under any of those options within the hybrid category, at least 2 of the districts would be required to be majority-minority, again, meaning that a majority of the voting population, based on census data, would be Asian American or Latino. The school committee under these options, for either the 8-1 option or the 8-3 option, the 8 districts would be combined into 4 groups, so 4 groups of 2 districts each. And 1 school committee member would be elected from each of those, and then there would be 2 at-large members and the mayor would also be on the school committee. Under the hybrid 7-2 option, each district would simply elect one member of the school committee. There would be no at-large school committee members under that option, and the mayor would not be on the school committee. So some commonly noted features of hybrids, and I'm not distinguishing here between 8.1, 8.3, 7.2, it's just hybrid in general. This system is seen to have a balance or mix of some of the advantages and disadvantages of each of district and at-large representation. So, as with districts, barriers to entry for running for office may be lower than for an at-large seat. However, people do have the option to run at-large as well, so depending on where you feel your strengths are, you might choose to run for a district, or you might choose to run at large. People, the electorate, public, would have a district representative. However, they also would have an alternative person who is or one or three people, depending on the system, who is answerable to them if they feel that their views are different from their district rep. That could be attractive. And for much the same reasons as I articulated with the district system, it's viewed as a simple voting option. Third system would be at-large, an at-large system, and the system would be run through ranked choice voting. So all candidates under this system, whether on the council or the school committee, would run at-large citywide. And I should just say the size of the city council and the size of the school committee would remain as now. And voters could vote for as many candidates as they would like to. However, unlike the present system, voters would rank their choices under this system. So they would say which is their first choice, which is their second choice, for as many choices as they feel they have interest or information about the candidates. And the voting would be tallied or counting so that it's roughly proportional to voting preferences across the city. So some commonly noted features of this system. At-large representation, as now, means that all councillors are answerable to all voters. People running for office under this system could choose whether to run on geography, on an issue, or on some other basis. And by that, I mean that the threshold to get elected under this system would be lower than under the present system. And so somebody might choose to mount a campaign based on geography and still stand a chance of election. Somebody might choose to run on an issue, say the environment, animal welfare, whatever it is. And also a minority candidate of any description who is not one of the minorities who brought the lawsuit could run a campaign that appeals to what that person perceives to be their particular interests. And at-large elections are said to generate, as a general principle, generate more competition than district elections. Ranking candidates is straightforward and fair. So even if somebody's number one choice isn't picked, their number two may be, et cetera.
Before we go further with this, I think there might be people in the audience, and probably there's people on TV that are hearing this all for the first time. So I think it would probably be helpful for everybody if you were able to explain how we got to this place, and why we're doing this, why we have to do this, and also the definition or an explanation of what a minority-majority district is. And then finally, in terms of ranked choice voting, will that be the same as the way Cambridge conducts their elections, which is sometimes referred to as proportional representation? I think it would be helpful to everybody if we could get an answer on those before we move forward with the speakers, if there's no objection.
Madam Solicitor?
So in answer to the first question, how did we get here and why are we doing this? This was a lawsuit that was brought forth. Two groups comprised a group of plaintiffs, and they were members of the Southeast Asian community and Hispanic community. We went through extensive discovery and, most importantly, had engaged the assistance of an expert, which is really critical in a case like this. What also is, I think, important to understand in these cases is that when you have the at-large system that Lowell had employed for many years, for decades, that the expert is looking at our voting data and the trends. And it's the analysis that is done by an expert for communities that face these types of challenges that really turns as to whether there is a troubling trend with respect to the way votes are taken or not. And what is to be avoided with respect to the vote under the Voting Rights Act, which was the impetus of the lawsuit, is anytime you have distinct groups, minority groups, who are sufficient in size that they can and should have a substantive say in an election, that vote gets effectively washed out by or nullified by the majority of voters. In this case, in Lowell, that would be the the Caucasian vote. And so when our voting data was looked at by the expert that we hired, and just a couple of quick words about our expert. There are really just a handful of people in the country that are verified experts in this area. The individual that we had hired, a retired professor at the University of North Carolina, is one of those experts. He had been utilized by the Justice Department, by the federal courts, by a lot of other communities, and in fact was an expert in the seminal case in voting rights challenges. So he had looked at the data of the city, had advised the city and the council, and had executive sessions with the council, and had advised the council that there was in fact a problem with respect to our voting trends, that they were consistent with what would constitute a violation under the Voting Rights Act. And from that point on, the city started negotiating with the plaintiffs over, I believe, a dozen sessions in U.S. District Court with a retired federal judge, and we came to a settlement. One of the things that was noted when we had our larger public session, that our expert is not aware of a settlement of the kind that Lowell has put forth. And that really, it's important for residents to understand that what makes this settlement rather unique is that the council made sure that there was a method for the public to be able to substantively weigh in on what type of change would ultimately take place to the way the city votes. And as a result, tonight, the council will limit these 4 systems down to 2, and voters will participate in a non-binding referendum as to which of those 2 systems voters feel would best serve the overall needs and interests of the city. It should also be just noted that the reason it's a non-binding referendum is that's what we have to do for this type of a case. We cannot put a binding referendum on. So once voters go and vote, and that vote comes back to the council will then ultimately choose what that system is. To answer the other 2 questions, which are much shorter in length, with respect to the Cambridge model, the at-large ranked choice voting is an option that is before the council. According to the consent decree that was entered into by both parties, the parties have agreed that the ranked choice voting would operate in a way similar to Cambridge. It could be slightly different, and I think, frankly, what we would be looking at is the purchase of new voting machines, and those voting machines would ultimately calculate the results of the ranked choice voting. Lastly, a minority-majority community is simply the minority population in a certain district that is sufficient in size to be larger in number than the overall majority community that compromises the city as a whole.
Thank you.
If, for example, excuse me, in the voting, what if one option 15% vote for it, and the other option 20%, and you have 2/3 of the population don't vote for either one of them? What happens on something like that? Have you discussed that with the judge?
Madam Solicitor?
So the consent decree specifies that the council would give great deference to the results of the, excuse me, non-binding ballot. However, we don't know what those results are. It could be that, as you gave an example, it could be that it's a virtual tie, or that one just slightly edged out another. So ultimately, it comes back to the council, and the council can take a look at those results. If there is a clear referendum, then the expectation would be that the council would adhere to that. But absent that, these are decisions that ultimately rest with you, the council, and it remains up to your judgment. And it was done specifically for those reasons.